everybody. Welcome. Hello. Greetings from Boulder, from Montreal. I'm Katie. I work at Madison Street Books. I'm very honored today to be with Sara Freeman, the author of TIDES, and Jamie Quatro, here to talk about TIDES today. Let's see. So I'm going to introduce our authors for us, guys. We have Sara Freeman here to talk about her new book. Congratulations, by the way, Sara. So exciting. Sara is a Montreal-born writer. She's Zooming in, crowdcasting in from Boston today. She graduated from Columbia University with an MFA in fiction in 2013, where she won the Henfield Prize for the best piece of short fiction. TIDES is already making quite a splash, not an intentional pun, but one that I will claim. It was named one of the Globe and Mail's most exciting books of 2022, one of the Telegraph's 4 best debut novels to read in 2022, and one of LitHub's most anticipated books of 2022. And as a bookseller, I personally love LitHub, so that's super impressive to me because that's where all of us put our reviews. And then we have Jamie Quatro here today. She's an author as well. She is calling in from Chattanooga today, and she is the author of Fire Sermon, and I want to show you more. And she's going to be asking some questions to Sara today, facilitating a little bit of conversation about the book. So welcome, guys. I'll turn it over to you, and thank you so much. We are extremely excited to have you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hey, Sara.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you, Katie, for that introduction.
Thank you. Where we're coming from, and when I found out she was from Montreal, we had a little bit of a hockey chat. My husband's a big hockey fan, and just want to say shout out to the Canadians. I see some people here from Montreal. Wait, and from Ottawa. Is Ottawa also Canadians?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Oh, God. The Senators? Did I get that right?
Senators. Yes. Thanks, Sam. My husband's from Detroit, so he's like a big Red Wings guy. But yeah, I won't ask any hockey questions. I promise.
I will disappoint you if you ask me hockey questions.
It's been a learning process for me too. But to your book, I just want to say a little bit about the amazing experience I had when I received this book. You and I share the same agent and editor, and I received this galley from both of them. And that's huge. I mean, when my agent and my editor both say, you have to read this book, I knew that I had to, and it did not disappoint. It's gorgeous and lyrical and compulsive to read, and I just feel very privileged to be here talking with you tonight about it. So I want to open it up to you and ask if you would maybe, for people who don't know what TIDES is about, maybe give a little like high-level summary and then retread, if you'd be willing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really nice to be in conversation with you, Jamie. I also feel like our agent-editor connection makes us have that kind of, yes. And I was just telling Jamie that I re-entered her novel today, Fire Sermon, which I loved upon first reading, but it has such a propulsive quality, and so it's really nice to be in conversation with you. So the sort of the summary, of TIDES is challenging, right? Because it's without giving the entire plot away, I would say it's really, I consider it kind of an aftermath novel. This is a woman who leaves her home behind, her family, her sibling, her spouse, in the aftermath of a difficult traumatic event that we don't really have access to until quite a bit later in the narrative. And she sort of washes up in a seaside town and starts to kind of build something. Is it a life? Is it a semblance of a life? But we sort of see her piece together her life and maybe herself to a certain extent. And so, yeah, that's the sort of the shape of the narrative, I would say. I'm going to read a passage actually in the middle of the book, that at a point in the narrative when the protagonist now has a name, which takes a while. So her name is Mara and her brother is Paul, and we sort of see her begin to remember or allow herself to remember. And it's a short passage.
What page?
Okay. We're going to be reading along. That's exciting. Page 128.
All right.
It is Christmas morning, and she remembers. She is all alone in the world. She wraps the blanket around her shoulders and goes downstairs with a cup of tea, the leftover half of a glazed donut. Her pack of cigarettes already nearly smoked. Not a soul on the road. This is exactly what she wanted, she must remind herself, to slip into a blind spot, to run out on her life. For dinner, she warms up a can of baked beans on her hot plate and covers them with a layer of grated cheddar. She eats the whole thing straight out of the pot, chasing it with a bottle of brouilly. She has nothing to occupy her, no safe thoughts to keep her company. It is snowing outside, and she crouches on the bed, her nose up against the cold window pane, watching the clots making their descent. She spots one as it catches on a thin branch and splits into two parts. There was a game they used to play as children, she and Paul. I am you and you are me. Paul would answer to Mara and Mara to Paul. They played for days until their mother, worn thin, finally gave in to their game. Mara would be Paul and Paul would be Mara. They played as if they belonged to no one, to nothing. Even their parents were irrelevant, their father a sudden absence, a fact to move around. Their mother an omnipresence, unruly ocean to their raft. It was just a game they invented. I am you and you are me. Later, babysitters, teachers, relatives would declare it, how little they had in common, how opposite they were. If she was tall and wraith-like, then he was short and strong. If he was a good egg, then she was a bad apple. If he was a bright auditorium, then she was a dimly lit corridor. If he was fully realized, exemplary, then she was pure potential, an energy not yet forged into its singular shape. But it didn't really matter until her sister-in-law came along. She had come to their family as an anthropologist, an envoy from the land of the adjusted, notebook in hand, pencil sharpened to a violent point. Enmeshed, that was her conclusion after months of observation, Paul reported back to Mara. She had a way of using the ugliest possible word to describe each thing, twisting what was pure into something tawdry. She can feel it, the past, grabbing, pulling, not the recent years, no, it is the distance past that draws her in. She does not flail around. It takes her wherever it wants her to go. This is the mind's undertow.
Beautiful. I love that last beat too. It's that internal rhyme that's there, almost like a poem. I'm so glad you chose this passage to read, not the least because I learned how to pronounce bruit. Can you say it again?
Bruit.
Oh, that's a difficult one.
It is, that R.
We'll talk about wine in this conversation, I hope. I just broke my dry January today. Thank God we had this on February 1st.
Congratulations.
But also because of this idea of twinning, the siblings and the twinning and this disruption of the twinning that the sister-in-law brings in. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, could you talk a little bit about the genesis of the book and how it came into its current beautifully lyrical form, condensed form?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it certainly didn't start as a particularly lyrical or condensed book. It was, I had I had an idea about these siblings who were sort of too close, and I wrote out that narrative with a lot of quite a bit of space around it. Just exploring this sibling relationship, and seeing what happened to them. And a lot of it was actually set in Montreal, and then some of it was set in this seaside town. And I wrote through it feeling it was quite bad, having that sense as I was writing, like, ugh, I don't know if this has very much energy. But forcing myself to kind of understand what their rupture is, which seemed very important to the story. And once I put it aside and sort of returned to it, what I found was that, in fact, I was right. It was pretty dead. And something about the structure just wasn't, coalescing or something. And I found that the parts that were in this kind of dislocated present tense of the seaside town had a sort of atmosphere that I had not quite known I was creating. And so there was an element of discovery, like, okay, these like few sentences that are really located in this place psychically are really interesting and are poetic. And in fact, once I sort of, mourned all those other sentences, which were the majority of the sentences, I was able to open up a new document and really start with the idea of those more energetic, alive sentences, and really write with that tone in mind. And the sort of paragraphs, these like really emerged pretty organically from wanting to keep that sort of like condensed lyrical energy, and so lyrical but clipped, right? I felt like it was both. So yeah, it very much emerged from the drafting process.
That's so interesting on two levels. One, that setting was kind of one of the drivers of structure and form for you. And then also, I think one of the most powerful things about this book is that the form it informs, articulates, and illuminates the psychological state of this character, which is at the beginning of the novel. It's almost like stasis, right? It's almost like how she's feeling by what is unsaid. It's almost the via negativa, the negative spaces and the white space really kind of shows us where she's at. And I love novels that do that, where the form rises out of the psychological state of the character. And it sounds like you listened to that when you were drafting.
I did, and I didn't. I should say it was not, applied. It was really something that I actually wasn't even sure that I liked as I was doing it, but felt, in fact, when I first thought about it, I noticed that there was like a really childlike almost sing-songy, with these like full rhymes, quality to the tone. And I even imagined a little kind of very simple line drawing at the bottom of each page of text. I had this image of like text and then something so abstracted and sort of minimal, almost like a children's story, but for adults.
Like, do you know Tove Jansson, the summer book?
Yes, I love that book.
I was going to bring that book up. Was she one of your influences?
I actually think I read it afterwards. I read the summer book later, so that was a nice discovery.
Absolutely love that novel. And after I finished it, you know what I wrote in my journal? I'm going to write a novel with illustrations because there's something so lovely, and you pause, right? And it's another way of experiencing white space. And it's like you say, the minimal drawings give you just enough to you feed your imagination, but not dictate it. So I am all for a reprint. Grove Atlantic, Elizabeth Schmitz, I know you're here with illustrations.
I actually haven't really shared that with anybody. It was really, this very early like instinct I had, but I'm not at all an illustrator, so I just
I'm kind of
relied on words.
brainstorming what they could be like. The bed up in the attic.
I thought of them as just lines, it felt
really?
like something was happening in the language where it was just being so distilled and sort of almost frayed.
Yeah, the language is, I mean, it's one of the most beautiful things about this book. And then the setting, I know, I think you've said it's a fictional town, but there's mention of that it's across the border from Quebec. And in my mind, I was picturing Maine, though I've never been there, or like Cape Cod or something. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the setting and how that setting found you.
Yeah, I think, I do think of the story in a kind of fable, as a sort of fable. And so I think both realist and a fable at the same time. And so in this same way, the town is sort of a town I've been to, or many towns I've been to in that area, but also it's a sort of every town, every town by the sea. And actually, it's been quite nice to hear from readers in England or readers in the Pacific Northwest who are saying, "Oh, I'm picturing this seaside town that I know." That's sort of, I think, particularly the off-season component. People feel very sort of compelled by that aspect, that kind of denatured aspect of the town, in the same way that Mara is denatured.
Yeah.
So I think this
a great French word, dénaturé. That's a really beautiful word in French, but keep going.
Yeah, I think I just felt it had to be both, in some way inhabitable, realistic enough to be inhabitable, but it also had to not have too many of the characteristics of a real locatable place, because it's not that kind of story to a certain extent, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Did you think intentionally about moving it out of Canada and into the United States? Was that?
I don't know if it was an intent. I mean, I think a lot of the process of writing this book was, not to sound too woo-woo, but pretty subconscious, kind of letting this be really, as deeply as I could, this character's story. And I pictured her far enough away from her home, not too far. And I knew that her parent was from somewhere else, from the States. And it emerged that this place would be on the other side of the border. But I didn't, I wasn't like, this is a story of migration from Canada to the US. I was just, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not implicit in the text at all. I just wondered. But what is, I think, what that allows you to do, or what you did so wonderfully, is there is some class disparity and some look at social class and socioeconomic class, because it is a wealthy seaside town.
Definitely.
She encounters the addicts, and she's also economically struggling, and so that element is there as a underlying element. Certainly not foregrounded, but I thought that was also had a lot of beautiful resonance. Can we talk about the slow reveal that you do, which is so hard to do? So there's this kind of trauma, and that in her past. On the first page, she's left her marriage, and she's left her brother and his wife where she's been living, and that they have an infant. But then, as the novel progresses, when did that slow reveal kind of come to you as a how do I want to say, not a plot driver, but the novel is so beautifully lyrical, and not much, you would think, not much is happening. And yet there is this through line that's propulsive that kind of comes to this, no spoilers, but I was on the edge of my seat by the end. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that? how you
Yeah.
navigated through those waters.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I mean, I'm glad that it felt that it was, a sort of reveal or some kind of revelation. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
exciting that that was
Mm-hmm.
happening narratively. Um, I think that, the fact that I keep returning to the drafting process, but I think the fact that I had this story written out and that I knew what had happened
Mm-hmm.
to this character meant that I was always keeping this sort of conflict, this rupture, particularly between her and her brother, even though now it's sort of like it's not the biggest part of the revelation in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I had it always in the back of my mind, and I played a lot with how much of the past would emerge. And I would say much less of the past emerged as I edited and edited and edited. And so I think the past became this very alive part of the narrative because there was also very little of it, to a certain extent. I mean, when you get those moments, you're like, okay, she's a person, she has a history, she has
Yes.
these relationships because it is so sort of,
Mm-hmm.
if not static, then yeah, not much happens, right, at the surface level of the narrative. So I was aware that the past was very powerful and that I needed to detonate these small past bombs very carefully. And the placing of them in order was excruciating. I mean, I really was not sure that I could manage it. I'm not narratively savvy, like in the way that I know some writers are. So it was a lot of placing things at page 129 and thinking, not 129, it has to be 83.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And that
yeah,
the ordering is so difficult, right? Because if you place it at 129, that changes things on 83 and 72 and all that. And it's so, yeah, you did it. It's seamless. It's seamless. And I think it's perfectly paced. And I absolutely love the truth of the fact that somebody who's in this intense state of grief and trauma would would subvert and bury the past, and it would only bubble up at those pressure points. And I think that's what I was noticing on my second or third read through, is that you really allow those past bombs to detonate at natural points. It's not like the author coming in and saying, "Oh yeah, I need to give this information." It's truly, they're coming out at moments where it makes sense psychologically and with what's happening, with some of what's going on around her, with Simon and Simon's wife. I don't know how much you want to talk about the characters, but one thing I also noticed reading through is that you have all of these pairs, these twin, kind of these. So there's Paul and his wife, the sister-in-law, and there's Lucien, her ex-husband, and his ex-wife. There's the father and the mother. There's Simon and Charlotte, and she's sort of untwinned, right? But the most important twinning is obviously with the brother, and then that the sister-in-law kind of disrupts that. But did you think at all about those dual relationships and how she was kind of insinuating herself in all of them and not finding a place?
yeah. I mean, I have a psychoanalytic lens that I can't help, but
Yeah.
and I do think of her as a very, dyadic type person, someone who really exists in intimacy with one person and who actually can't manage the introduction of a third, and yet here she is creating all of these
Right.
triangles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it's psychologically, it is who she is, someone who is just in this relatively underdeveloped state of just needing this, and also very relatable state of just wanting that one person, and yet really finding it difficult maintain those ties. And so I think the breaking of the relationship with the brother is actually a huge part of her unraveling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the seminal relationship in the novel, and you know that early on, that her attachment to her brother is not a healthy one from a young age, from a
Yeah.
very young age. I was so captivated by that scene. I hope I'm not giving too much away.
No.
Early on, or I think it's early on, where they're at camp and she finds somebody's died. That all the counselors and all the kids are saying there's been a death, a kid has died. And at first she's kind of flippant about it, doesn't really process it as something real. And then the name of the dead child comes out and it's Paul. And gosh, I can't, now I'm telling this story, I'm like, I'm going to give the secret away, but it turns out that it was a ruse. And, the anger that the sister experiences after that is kind of inordinate. So yeah, I'm just fascinated by, I don't read a lot of sibling relationship books. I don't know how many are, I think you made a list at some point of good sibling books. Were those?
I did. I mean, they were, I realized as I was making this list for LitHub, I realized that many of my favorite books had siblings in them, and that they're often younger siblings, but there aren't that many books about adult siblings. And I was also surprised to find that that we don't talk about adult siblings that much as a source of, we're very interested, I think, in the nuclear family, parental relationships with our parents, relationships with our spouses, but something about, what happens to siblings once they grow up, but they've had this like sort of seminal experience of being each other's often only friend or ally. Kind of is culturally taboo or culturally kind of understudied or.
It's fascinating, and I wonder if that's an American thing or if it's like worldwide, or if other cultures do kind of foreground or privilege that sibling adult relationship.
Maybe.
Be interesting. So what are some? I'm thinking of The Sound and the Fury, of course. Very much of that. Was that on your list?
It wasn't. I had to be. There are actually many good sibling books. That is one of them, but I didn't include that one. I have on there the Book of Franza, which is a book by Ingeborg Bachmann, an Austrian writer, who it's actually an incomplete manuscript, but it's been published and it's totally gorgeous, about kind of post-World War Austria and this woman who's kind of on the edge, and her brother is trying to sort of save her, basically. So it's like very strange and internal and close and fascinating. And a more recent book by Daisy Johnson, Sisters, which is lovely. Really like a gothic retelling of a sibling relationship. We the Animals by Justin Torres, which is a gorgeous, also very lyrical kind of exploration of family and siblinghood. What else was on my list? I'm forgetting. I'm very bad with book recall. I feel like this might be an occupational issue. But
ask you like what books were influences on you as you were coming up as a writer at Columbia, or even before that? Who were your seminal authors?
Well, I think for this particular book, I was thinking a lot of these very kind of urgent, condensed books about sort of female interiority, like Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante, Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, even something like The Watchtower by Elizabeth Harrower, I forget her. And what else? The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginsburg, very kind of also condensed, urgent, kind of narratives of disintegration. And I feel like, I do feel like your book, Fire Sermon, has that quality too of just the interior heat of someone's psychology unraveling the story, making the story. Like you feel it from the inside, which is, it's a really particular it's a really particular feeling being a reader of that kind of work versus something that's been narrated with a
Right.
lot of kind of outside energy or yeah. I don't know if that resonates, but
Plot with plot.
plot, yes, plot. Oh, I forgot plot.
I don't know.
I need plot.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, you said something, and I think it was in Granta that I absolutely loved. I wrote it down. I'm going to read it because I think it's what we're talking about. You said, I felt in writing Tides that the simultaneity of attention necessary to shore up the imaginary world, to be both entirely inside, swallowed by the sentences and their atmosphere, and also very much outside of them, aware of the mouth doing the swallowing, amounted to a near impossible marriage of submission and control. And I had to sit with that for a while because I absolutely agree that there's this strange, almost cognitive dissonance or dualism needed to fully inhabit and draft and allow the characters to take over and listen, almost kind of what you were describing when you started to hear Mara's voice in its current form in this seaside town. That there's so much, it's scary, right? You have to submit to that. And yet then you also have to be the one in control and manipulating and ultimately the crafter of something that you already submitted to. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about maybe is one in the drafting and one in the editing, or how do you navigate between those two states of mind?
I think I don't know, and I think that's why I did it. I was able to do it once in this pretty. I think that's why the book also has a pretty narrow, to a certain extent, a narrow scope, because I actually found it extraordinarily difficult to hold both of those things, to know that I needed to sustain the interior, what is it, logic, the interior atmosphere of someone who is not me, who is adjacent, also very far away, and know that it could end, that it would have a shape to hold it. I found doing that with at the same time, which I actually think I want to do again, doing both those things at the same time, very, very difficult. I can imagine doing it a different way, right? Where you sort of have a sense of the shape in advance.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what's the voice I want for, I don't know. I mean, or
that's never happened for me that way. I'm very much a sound-based writer. Like it's a sound of a sentence, and that sound of writing that sentence and listening to it leads to the next. And I really feel like you must work that way too in drafting.
I think I do, and I think that's why I found the other part, the holding the shape, holding the structure, really difficult. Like I wasn't sure that I could do it, and in fact, I'd tried a couple times with other projects, and I wasn't able to make it coalesce. And so maybe it's practice. Certainly, the drafting process, having had this ugly first draft, and then finding something in there that seemed like it contained within it the building blocks of something cohesive.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I also am not sure I fully understand how it happened. Not to say it was so magical, but to me, it felt like a discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should. If it doesn't feel that way to you, it's not going to feel that way to readers, right?
Right.
Did anything surprise you? And then after this, I want to open it up to audience questions. But when you were drafting, were you absolutely shocked by anything as you were writing?
I mean, I was shocked that it was so lyrical because it was not how I usually found myself writing. I found that it was really heavy with imagery, which was, I think, a question of kind of loosening myself up and maybe giving myself that containment of those small paragraphs, of feeling like they needed to be, they needed to be filled up with,
Okay.
more image.
That makes sense, I guess, because you already knew what had happened because you'd written that other novel.
Yeah.
So there were no surprises in the way I was surprised by what happened.
What happens?
Because you already had your other draft, so you knew it all. It was more of the voice that surprised you, or the.
I think her transgression, her actual transgression, did surprise me.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a little bit. That was a nice. I actually liked that surprise. I was like, okay, I like that this is what happens.
Yeah, it was perfect. It was perfect. And I hope we're teasing everyone.
I think we're doing fantastically.
Buying the book. So, audience members, if you have any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, Sarah and I can both see. And any questions about anything, basically, other than the dreaded how autobiographical is your work, which Sarah and I had a little chat about how much we both loathe that question. It doesn't matter.
And once again, guys, those links, if you do want to purchase the book, so there's a little bit of time left, you can buy Tides with that green button at the bottom of the screen you'll see. And then I actually dropped the link for Jamie Quatro's Fire Sermon into the chat as well. So you guys are thinking about your questions, just know those buttons are there for you if you want to purchase the book from us.
While people are thinking, I did want to ask you about wine and your wine research, because so I wrote one of the lines from the book down, and I've kind of carried it with me when I need to buy wine, and that is France for tradition, Italy for elegance, Spain for lunch. Is that did you make that up?
Yes. I totally invented that. I know only what I like and don't like. I'm just a completely uneducated snob. I have no.
Really?
Yeah.
I just assumed that you had done research and went talked with sommelier or something. But so I bought an Italian wine for tonight.
Oh, I know that one.
Elegance. You know this one?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it was like I say, our little wine shop that I normally buy wine at was closed for inventory, so we went to the cheese shop that has some wines. So they had this. It's a red blend, but it is good. We'll have another sip.
Please do. Jamie, I feel like we have this conversation, and I have to ask you about your drafting process and the way. Is that something that you have found? So, what is that like for you? I guess I'm curious, given how energetic I think your prose is.
Yeah, I mean, that my drafting process is absolutely different with every single thing I write. So, I mean, this is embarrassing, but I think it's a nice, small, intimate crowd. I'm in my studio right now. So never in my life have I, hold on, let me do it this way. Never in my life have I done that, which is put sticky notes for plot points in a novel. There's my novel, Elizabeth, if you're there. This novel that I'm writing on now is just, it's so plotted. I absolutely hate it. It's driving me crazy. It's like writing short stories.
It has a
Yes,
plot
it has
that
like a
you're.
structure. It has scaffolding. I read it was ZZ Packer essay. Was it ZZ Packer? Was it Zadie Smith maybe, on scaffolding your novel and how oftentimes you'll pick a structure and you'll kind of erect this scaffolding right within it, and then recognize that that scaffolding has to be absolutely knocked out from underneath. Yeah. So this one I've never done that. I usually write to sound. My short stories are all sound, an image. I'll see an image and think that's interesting. Oh, here we have a question. I know that you're also fluent in French. Do you find that having access to this other language affects your writing in English, or do these languages feel separate to you? Oh, that's a great question.
Hi, Sanai. Sanai is also a wonderful writer. If anyone hasn't read The Margot Affair, you should
Oh,
right
yes.
now. It's beautiful and also very, I think, influenced by French. Um,
I love that book.
it's a good question. I certainly think the fact that I learned French and English at the same time, French being my mother tongue, meant that English became this kind of escape because French is so regimented and rule based. I I learned a lot about grammar because you have to if you learn French as a child, and it makes I think English both more grammatically sort of interesting to me, and also I feel you can break with grammar a little bit more in English, and so it's like a it's yeah, I definitely feel both of the languages influence me, even though I don't speak French very much. Mum, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I don't speak very much French anymore, but I do think also the rhythms of French literature, which I read, as a teenager, certainly influence the way that I write.
How juste pardon, maman. How did you come up with the title Tides? What inspired you towards it?
I think the sort of like tidal theme came pretty naturally from writing and starting to find these rhythms that emerged in the in the language, and then also in the kind of psychology of the character, the push and the pull of the present and the past, this like push pull of her desire. It just seemed all very tidal, so I so it was a good title. Yeah.
There's a wonderful line in the novel, something there was no surface on which her thoughts can find their footing. There is no surface on which her thoughts can find their footing. And that sense of, being in flux and not having solidity underneath. There's a watery quality to the prose itself that I think the title nicely references.
That's nice.
If that's all the questions, we can wrap up.
Thank you so
I don't
much.
want to stop talking to you, but I think we can say goodnight.
Thank you so much for your wonderful
guys.
questions,
Well, thank
you.
everyone. Jamie.
Guys, and thank you so much for joining us, Jamie and Sarah. This was really incredible. I had a lot of fun. I think everybody else did too. Once again, those links to those books, they're in the chat. If anybody wants to purchase that book, support the authors, support a local business. Yeah, thanks for everything, guys. And if there's no more questions, I guess we can go ahead and finish everything up.
Looks like there's one more question.
She says, I often thought, I like your name, Hallie. That's my daughter's name. I often thought you were inside my head. Are you a keen observer of us all? Is that the question?
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes, Hallie. I am a keen observer of us all. Yes, I think I am. I hope I am. I hope I am. And I'm excited for, this is such a singular consciousness, but I'm also excited to write about more characters. So yeah, that's the next project.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too, but I dread that question in interviews. Sometimes I just don't want to talk about it, so I won't ask it, but we can't wait to read it, whatever it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you so much, Madison Street Books. And thank you to Kate,
Absolutely.
also my publicist at Grove, for organizing this. Really appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to the audience.